The night William would learn to sleep with an empty stomach. He was 50 years old, sitting on a cold concrete step with his back against a dumpster and his German shepherd pressed so tightly against his ribs that he could feel every breath the dog took. 3 days, 72 hours without a real meal. His last food had been half a granola bar he'd split with Smoky on Tuesday morning. Crouched behind the gas station on Mercer Street, while a teenager threw a slushy cup at them and told them to get gone. William didn't flinch. He never flinched anymore. The moss-green eyes that had once scanned jungles and rooftops and hostile corridors now simply stared at the cracked pavement between his boots. The deep lines carved into his forehead, the ones his old unit used to joke made him look like a weathered general, were tightened now, not from command, but from quiet, grinding endurance. He ran one large hand across Smoky's black and tan back, feeling the dog's powerful muscles shift under his palm. 30 kilos of trained, battle-tested German shepherd, and yet right now, the dog was the one holding him together. Smoky's amber eyes tracked the alley's entrance with that fierce, alert precision, always working, always watching, but his body stayed pressed warm against William's side. "Learned something new today, boy," William murmured, his voice low and rough as gravel. His square jaw barely moved. Hunger isn't the worst thing a man can feel. Smoky turned and looked at him directly, held his gaze, didn't look away. And in 12 hours, that dog would do something so unexpected, so quietly devastating, that a woman 3 blocks away would start crying on her front porch, and a stranger parked at the curb would step out of his car with shaking hands and say 6 words that changed everything. But first, William had to survive the night. Elm Cross Avenue was not a cruel street by nature. It had flower boxes in the windows of the corner bakery. It had a community board where residents posted lost cat flyers and casserole recipes. Mrs. Patricia Holt, age 73, still left a glass of lemonade on her stoop every summer afternoon for the mail carrier. But Elm Cross Avenue had decided, collectively and quietly, that William Wynne was dangerous. It hadn't happened all at once. It started 3 weeks ago when William first appeared, tall, broad-shouldered, with that military buzz cut going salt and pepper at the temples, the short box beard threaded with silver, the kind of build that made doorframes look narrow. He'd sat down on the bench near the laundromat with Smoky sitting at perfect attention beside him, and 2 mothers had immediately pulled their children across the street. He understood why. He looked like a threat. He carried himself like a man accustomed to being the most dangerous presence in any given room. Not because he wanted to, but because 22 years had made it impossible to stand any other way. The broad shoulders, the square-jawed face, the deep crow's feet carved around those green eyes. None of it softened easily. None of it said safe to a stranger on a Sunday afternoon. He'd knocked on 7 doors in the past 4 days. Politely, hat metaphorically in hand, even without a hat. He'd asked for nothing extravagant. A sandwich, a piece of bread, anything left over from dinner. He'd offered to carry boxes, rake leaves, haul trash. He had a voice that was steady and low, and completely non-threatening when he chose to use it that way. Every door had closed. One man, 40-something khaki shorts, sprinkler running on a perfect lawn, had said it plainly. "I don't want trouble. You look like trouble. Please leave before I call someone." William had nodded, turned, and walked away without a single word. Now it was night, and the street was quiet, and somewhere behind one of those warm-lit windows, someone was scraping a perfectly good plate of leftovers into a garbage bag. If this story is already pulling at something in your chest, you're not alone. Follow this channel and hit like, so you never miss what Smoky does next. This dog is about to change everything. To understand what Smoky did that night, you have to understand what Smoky was. He was not a pet. He had never been a pet. He was 30 kilograms of German shepherd shaped by years of canine operative training, the kind of training that didn't happen in suburban backyards with treat pouches and clickers, But in controlled environments with bite sleeves and long dark tunnels and gunfire desensitization and commands given in 3 languages, his black and tan coat was dense and healthy despite everything, because William, even starving, had managed to source dry kibble for him every single day. The big dog's posture, that powerful, athletic stance with the slightly forward lean and the intense amber gaze, made strangers step back instinctively. Children pointed. Men assessed. Smoky had been assigned to William's unit as a working dog during a classified overseas operation that William was not permitted to discuss. Even now, even homeless, even 7 years removed from active duty, they had worked together in conditions that would hollow out most men. They had kept each other alive in at least 3 documented instances, and several others that were never documented at all. When William was discharged, quietly with a handshake and a manila folder full of paperwork that essentially told him his country appreciated his service and wished him well, Smoky came with him. That part had taken 6 months of bureaucratic fighting, and 2 favors William had been saving for a decade. He'd won. Smoky was his. Fully, legally, permanently. And Smoky seemed to understand the weight of that, because he had never once, in 7 years of increasingly difficult circumstances, behaved as anything other than completely devoted to the man with the salt and pepper hair and the tired green eyes. Tonight, Smoky was watching the alley entrance, but his nose was pointed somewhere else entirely. William had eaten on Tuesday. It was now Friday, well past midnight, pressing towards Saturday. He'd kept count because counting was something you did in the field when everything else became uncertain. Counting kept the mind anchored. How many hours of daylight? How many potential exits from a position? How many days since your last resupply? 72 hours. He knew the physiology. He'd been trained in SEER, survival, evasion, resistance, and escape, and one module had covered starvation with clinical precision. The body begins consuming muscle mass after approximately 72 hours without caloric intake. Cognitive function starts degrading. Irritability increases. Judgment becomes compromised. He ran a hand along his jaw, feeling the short box beard, the silver streaks rough under his fingertips. He was aware that his hands were not entirely steady tonight. He was aware that the deep forehead wrinkles felt more pronounced when he pressed his fingers there, like the skin had thinned somehow in 3 days. He was not afraid of being hungry. Fear of hunger was a luxury for people who'd never been genuinely threatened. He was, however, afraid for Smoky. The dog had eaten today. William had found a half-open bag of dry kibble left near a trash bin, clean enough, and had given Smoky the entire thing. But that was yesterday's kindness. Tomorrow was a different calculation. He leaned his head back against the brick wall. The rugged, sun-kissed texture of his face caught the faint orange glow from the street lamp at the alley's mouth. His moss-green eyes closed for exactly 60 seconds. He counted, then opened again. Smoky was still watching the alley entrance. But now the big shepherd's ears were rotated, tracking something. Word travels on Elm Cross Avenue the way it travels on every small street in every medium-sized city, through back fences and group chats, and I wasn't going to say anything, but conversations between neighbors collecting their mail. William had been on Elm Cross for 9 days total. In that time, a narrative had been constructed about him that bore almost no relationship to the actual man sitting quietly in that alley. Margaret Chun, who lived at number 34, had told her neighbor that the man with the big dog had screamed at someone on Tuesday night. What had actually happened was that William, jolted out of a trauma-induced nightmare while sleeping behind a laundromat, had woken up shouting a tactical command in a hoarse, loud voice before fully orienting himself. He'd been awake and silent within 4 seconds. No one had been screaming at anyone. Derek Osmond at number 41 had told his wife that the dog was off-leash and aggressive near the park. Smoky had been on a lead. A child had run directly at him. And Smoky, perfectly trained, had simply stepped to the side and positioned himself between the child and William, which to an untrained observer looked threatening, and to anyone who knew K9 behavior looked like textbook protective repositioning. The stories had layered. 7 doors had closed in William's face, not because of who he was, but because of who they had collectively decided he must be. He knew this was happening. He had watched it happen before, in villages, in forward operating bases, in debriefs where the story on paper had already been decided before anyone asked the man in the room what had actually occurred. He did not argue with it. He was too tired to argue with it. Smoky pressed harder against his side, and William rested one large hand on the dog's broad head. Smoky smelled it first, the way he always smelled everything first. It was coming from the house directly behind the alley, number 29, the yellow one with the cracked gutter that William had mentally noted for 3 days as a potential shelter option if it rained. The back of the house faced the alley wall, and the kitchen window was tilted open about 4 inches. And from that 4-inch gap was coming the smell of something that made William's stomach contract so sharply he had to press his forearm against his abdomen. Roast chicken, rosemary, something with garlic, the warm, deep smell of actual food being actually cooked in an actual kitchen for people who lived inside a house. William breathed through his mouth. Tactical discipline applied to hunger. Create distance from the stimulus. Reduce the signal. Manage the response. Smoky was doing the opposite. The big shepherd was on his feet now. That powerful athletic frame oriented completely toward the yellow house, nose working in quick, precise intervals. His black and tan coat seemed almost electric in the dim orange light. He turned once and looked directly at William with those amber eyes, that fierce, utterly focused gaze, and William recognized the look. It was the same look the dog gave him in the field before requesting permission to investigate. "No, smoke," William said quietly. His voice was steady. His voice was always steady. "Leave it. That's not ours." Smoky sat down, but his nose kept working. 20 minutes passed. The kitchen light in the yellow house went out. The street went quieter. William closed his eyes. He did not hear Smoky leave. The gap between a sleeping man and a waking one is something Smoky understood precisely. He had been trained to know the difference between his handler resting lightly still alert and his handler genuinely, exhaustedly asleep. William, in year 7 of this life, had finally reached the stage of sleep that his body periodically forced on him regardless of conditions, the kind that came when the accumulated debt simply could not be deferred further. Smoky waited until that sleep settled fully. Then the big German shepherd stood up, shook himself once, and moved out of the alley with the absolute silence that had been trained into him over years of operational work. 30 kilograms moving with controlled precision of a dog who had learned that sound was a liability. He went to the yellow house. The recycling bins were pushed against the back wall, and between them and the foundation was a gap where the kitchen window's 4-inch opening was accessible at a slight angle if you were low enough to the ground. Smoky was not attempting to enter. What he had smelled, specifically, was not the chicken inside the kitchen. It was something outside, the covered plate that the woman, at number 29, Elena Vasquez, had placed on the back step for her husband who worked late shifts, waited with a ceramic bowl against the wind. The plate had been there for 4 hours. Her husband had texted saying he'd eaten at work. She'd left it anyway. Smoky studied it for a long moment. He was not a dog who stole food. He had never, in 7 years with William, taken food that was not given to him. This was not something William had trained into him so much as something Smoky had arrived at through his own considerable intelligence. He took the plate anyway, gently, from the edge, tilting in a way that kept the food from sliding. He carried it back across the darkness. He placed it beside William's hand. Then he sat down and waited. William woke to the smell. His eyes opened immediately. 22 years of training ensured there was no groggy intermediate stage, and his hand moved reflexively before his conscious mind fully engaged, locating Smoky's shoulder and confirming the dog's position. Smoky was right beside him, sitting, watching him with those calm, intent amber eyes. William registered the smell. His head turned. The plate was ceramic, blue-patterned edge, roast chicken pieces, rosemary potatoes, a fold of bread tucked against the side, still faintly warm. His moss-green eyes moved from the plate to the dog. The deep crow's feet at his temples creased as he studied Smoky's expression with the same careful attention he would have given any piece of intelligence in the field. "Where did this come from?" he said. Not a question, exactly. A debriefing. Smoky blinked, did not move. William looked at the plate for a long time. The prominent nose, the square jaw, the weathered face with its deep forehead lines, all of it completely still, processing. He picked up the plate, turned it over. Blue-patterned ceramic, handmade looking, with a small chip on the underside near the rim. Someone had made this. Someone had intended this for someone else. He set the plate back down, pressed both large palms flat against his thighs. "We can't keep this, Smoke." The dog looked at him steadily. "We have to take it back." There was a version of this night where William simply ate the food. He was 3 days into starvation. His muscle mass was degrading. His cognitive judgment, by his own clinical assessment, was operating at approximately 60% of baseline. The food had been left outside. No one had been watching. He did not eat the food. This was not because he was performing virtue for an imaginary audience. It was because he had spent 22 years operating on a simple code that had nothing to do with medals or commendations or the opinion of people on comfortable streets who called him dangerous. The code was his own. It said, among other things, you do not take what belongs to someone else, regardless of your circumstances. He'd maintained that code in conditions considerably more extreme than a hungry night in an alley. He stood up carefully, feeling the stiffness in his knees, the specific ache that came from sleeping on concrete at 50. The broad shoulders rolled back, the tall frame straightened, the unconscious military posture that never fully left him, and he picked up the plate with both hands. Smoky stood immediately, fell into position at his left side, and they walked together out of the alley. The street was silent. 2-something in the morning. The yellow house was fully dark now. William walked to the back gate, unlatched, pushed it open gently, and placed the plate back exactly where he'd found it, judging the position by the ring it had left on the step. He relatched the gate. He turned around, and he found himself standing 3 feet from a woman in a bathrobe, holding a flashlight, staring at him. Elena Vasquez was 54 years old, 5 feet 2, and had the particular quality of fearlessness that sometimes develops in people who have spent decades nursing in emergency rooms. She had seen blood and chaos and men twice her size reduced to terrified children at 3 a.m, and she had long since calibrated her alarm system to genuine threat rather than perceived threat. She looked at the tall man in front of her, the one with the salt and pepper military haircut and the short silver-streaked beard and the green eyes that somehow, even in the beam of her flashlight, registered more as tired than dangerous. She looked at the ceramic plate sitting on the step, exactly where she had left it 4 hours ago. She looked at the German shepherd at the man's side, sitting with immaculate precision, those amber eyes calm. "You put it back," she said. William met her gaze. "Yes, ma'am." "That's my late dinner plate. From my husband." She glanced at it. "That's exactly where I left it." "Yes, ma'am." She looked at him for a long moment. "Did you eat any of it?" A pause. "No." "Did your dog take it?" The smallest of pauses. "Yes." Elena looked at Smoky. Smoky looked at Elena. Some kind of rapid assessment seemed to occur between them. "Come inside," she said. "Both of you." If Smoky's loyalty is hitting different right now, it should be, follow this channel and like this story. There are 18 more parts, and what happens next will stay with you for a long time. Don't lose us. Elena Vasquez's kitchen was warm and smelled of the same rosemary and garlic that had reached the alley, and William sat at her table with the particular stillness of a man who had learned not to disturb spaces that weren't his. He sat with his large hands flat on the table, the sun-kissed rugged skin of his forearms under the kitchen light, the salt and pepper buzz cut slightly flattened on one side from sleeping against brick. He took up significant space in her chair, simply by virtue of the broad shoulders, the muscular build that hadn't entirely diminished even after 3 days of nothing. Elena moved around her kitchen without apparent anxiety. She reheated the chicken plate. She put bread on a separate board. She set a bowl of water on the floor and looked at Smoky and said, "Go ahead." And Smoky walked to it calmly and drank. She sat across from William and folded her hands. "How long?" she asked. "On the street. Without food." He met her eyes. There was no performance in his expression, no reaching for sympathy. 3 days. She nodded slowly. "And you were going to put the plate back." "It wasn't mine. A lot of people in your position would have considered it a gift from the universe." The crow's feet around his green eyes deepened slightly. The closest his face had come to anything like a wry expression. "I've had a complicated relationship with gifts from the universe." She pushed the plate toward him. "Eat." She asked questions the way nurses ask questions, practically, without editorializing, cataloging information for utility rather than judgment. Name, how long homeless, medical conditions, nearest shelter, whether he'd tried the VA. William answered in the same register, evenly, briefly, without self-pity. William Wynne, homeless for 14 months, though it had been unstable housing for 4 years before that. No untreated medical conditions. Nearest shelter was a Garfield Street men's facility, which did not permit dogs. A fact that he delivered with the same flatness as every other fact, as though it were simply a logistical parameter rather than the reason he'd spent over a year outside. He would not go anywhere Smoky could not go. He did not say this with drama. He said it the way you would state a non-negotiable operational constraint. Elena looked at Smoky again. The big shepherd was now lying near the kitchen entrance, chin on his paws, eyes still tracking the room. 30 kilos of trained discipline. Waiting. He a working dog? Retired K9. Yours from service? Yes. And when you left the service, she stopped, recalibrated. Were you given transition support? Housing assistance? A brief pause. The square jaw moved slightly. I was given a folder. Elena was quiet for a moment. She had worked 26 years in emergency medicine. She had held the hands of people the system had failed so comprehensively that the failure had become almost architectural, built into the structure of the thing itself. "Finish eating," she said. "Then we'll figure out where you're sleeping tonight." The back room of Elena's house was technically a storage room. Boxes, a filing cabinet, a fold-out cot that her nephew used when he visited, winter coats on a rolling rack. Elena pulled out the cot with the brisk efficiency of someone who had made rapid resource assessments in chaotic environments and said, "Sheets are in the cabinet. Bathroom's the first door. There's a bolt on the inside." William stood in the doorway of the storage room with the particular expression of a man who was recalculating reality. "Mrs. Vasquez." "Elena." "Elena." He paused. "You don't know me." "I know you put that plate back," she said. "At 2 a.m. Hungry. That tells me something. People do things for all kinds of reasons." "Yes," she agreed. "And I've been working emergency medicine for 26 years, which means I've developed a fairly accurate read on people. You can disagree with my assessment, but the cot's still there." She looked at Smoky. "He housebroken?" "Completely." "Then there's a patch of grass out the back door at the end of the hall. He can go out if he needs to." She turned back to William. The flashlight was still in her hand, though she'd stopped pointing at him an hour ago. "There's a bolt on the inside of the door," she repeated. For your comfort, not mine." She left him standing in the doorway. William stood there for a moment. The deep forehead wrinkles were more complex than usual. Then he stepped inside, and Smoky followed him. And the big shepherd did a single circuit of the room, checking Coroner's perimeter assessment, old habits, before choosing a spot near the door and lying down. William sat on the edge of the cot. It was the first soft surface he'd been on in 40 days. He sat there for a while before he let himself lie down. William was awake before the sun. He always was. He had remade the cot with military precision. Corners tight, pillow-centered, fold-out frame refold. By the time the first gray light was bleeding through the storage room's high window, he'd used the bathroom, quietly, the one with the bolt on the inside, and washed his face and neck and hands with the kind of thorough attention to hygiene that people misread as excessive until they understood what sustained field conditions did to a person's relationship with cleanliness. He looked at himself in the mirror for a moment, moss-green eyes, steady, the short box beard, the silver threading through the black, the prominent nose, the square jaw, the rugged, sun-toughened skin that held its lines even in dim morning light. 50 years old and looking, he thought with some detachment every day of it. Smoky was sitting by the door when he came back. Ready? Elena was already in the kitchen. Coffee was made. There was toast. William stopped in the kitchen doorway, and she looked up from the table where she was reading something on her phone, still in her bathrobe. "Sit," she said. He sat. Smoky lay under the table, his powerful body folded with practiced ease, his ears up. They drank coffee together in silence for a while. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was a silence of two people who had both, in their respective ways, spent significant portions of their lives in crisis, and had learned that quiet mornings were a specific form of treasure. "I need to take the plate back to the front step," William said. Elena looked up. "Why?" "Because whoever's asking questions should find it where it belongs." Elm Cross Avenue came to life on Saturday mornings between 7 and 9. Coffee runs, newspaper retrieval, dog walkers who hadn't yet learned to be afraid of the German shepherd at number 29's back in trance. William had asked Elena if he could walk Smoky around the block. She'd said yes, and handed him a travel mug of coffee as he went out the front door, and he'd stood on her front step for a moment in the early light, tall and broad against the pale sky, the salt and pepper buzz cut, the box beard, the green eyes taking in the street. Smoky was at his left side, perfect heel. The big black and tan shepherd moved with that aggressive yet fluid grace, the kind of control power that turned heads, that made people calculate distances. 3 neighbors saw him as he began his circuit of the block. Margaret Chun at number 34 was getting her newspaper. She stopped when she saw him. He nodded. She did not nod back, but she also did not retreat, which was something. Derek Osmond's wife was in their front garden. She watched William and Smoky walk past. Smoky glanced at her once, that fierce amber gaze, and then looked forward again. She said nothing. The third person was a man William didn't recognize, parked at the curb near the laundromat in a gray sedan, watching his phone. He looked up as William and Smoky passed, and something happened in his face, a quick, almost invisible reaction that William's 22 years of training registered as recognition. The man looked back at his phone. William kept walking, but his own awareness had shifted 2 degrees, the way it always did when something had been flagged. William completed his circuit and returned to Elena's front step, and the gray sedan was still there. He drank the last of the coffee from the travel mug. Smoky sat at his heel and watched the sedan the way the dog watched everything, with that total, unblinking attention that made it seem like the shepherd was processing more information than most humans managed on a good day. The man in the sedan was in his mid-40s, perhaps. Short dark hair going gray. Good jacket. He was doing the thing where you look at your phone, but you're actually tracking peripheral information, which was something William recognized because he had done it himself approximately 10,000 times. The man had looked at him, not the way people looked at a homeless veteran and his dog. That particular cocktail of discomfort and quick erasure. He had looked at him the way someone looks at a face they are placing, running it against some internal catalog. William's mind ran through possibilities with the rapid efficiency of someone who had, at various points, genuinely needed to know if a stranger was a threat. Former unit, debrief contact, someone from the other side of the work, the bureaucratic side, the classified mission support side, or someone from a neighborhood who simply resembled someone he'd once known. Smoky whined very quietly, a micro sound barely audible. William looked down at him. The shepherd was looking at the sedan. Smoky never whined at nothing. The man got out of the gray sedan at 9:14 on a Saturday morning. He was 5'11", William assessed automatically, 180 pounds, approximate. The jacket was good, civilian clothes, but military posture underneath them, the particular way the spine held itself that was different from gym posture or athletic posture. The hands were relaxed, visible, which was deliberate. He walked toward William without hesitation or performance, which meant he wasn't afraid and wasn't trying to be intimidating. That left professional or personal. William did not stand up from the step. He set the coffee mug beside him and rested his large hands on his knees. Smoky stood, and William touched the back of the dog's neck lightly, easy, and Smoky sat, though the amber eyes were locked entirely on the approaching man. The man stopped 6 feet away, reasonable distance. He looked at William's face for a moment. The green eyes, the prominent nose, the square jaw with the silver-streaked beard, all of it unchanged in a way that strongly built faces don't entirely change, even when the years accumulate. Then he said, "Wynne, Operation Shearwater. You ran the eastern perimeter." William was very still for a moment. The deep lines in his forehead didn't move. Operation Shearwater had been classified enough that William had never said the name out loud in 7 years of civilian life. "Who are you?" William said. Flat, quiet. The man's jaw moved. "My name is Carter. I was logistics. You never saw me. I was never in country. But I saw the after-action reports." He paused. "I saw your name on a list 6 weeks ago. A list I shouldn't have been looking at. It said you were," he stopped. "It said your current status was unhoused." Carter sat down on the step, not invited. But William didn't stop him, which Carter seemed to understand was as close to an invitation as he was going to get. Smoky reassessed him from close range, the thorough, systematic sniff of a dog, taking a complete reading, and then sat back down. Not relaxed, exactly, but not alarmed. William noted this. "There's a backlog," Carter said. "You probably know this. Veterans Housing Assistance. The wait list for caseworkers with the VAs. Transitional housing program is 14 months in this district. 14 months. He said it the way people say things they find personally intolerable but structurally unmovable. I work in federal contract administration now. I see the budgets. I see where the money goes and where it doesn't go." He looked at his own hands. "It doesn't go to the right places." William said nothing. He was not going to perform gratitude for information he was already living. "I was looking for you specifically," Carter continued, "after I saw the list." He glanced at Smoky. "The dog flag actually helped me find which district. Not many 30-kilo K9 trained shepherds on the street." "Why were you looking?" Carter was quiet for a moment. The Saturday morning sounds of the street went on around them. A lawnmower starting somewhere, a child's bike going past. "Because I read the after-action on Shearwater," he said. "The actual one, not the one that went in the public record." He looked directly at William. "And I know what you did out there, and I know what you got for it." He said the last sentence with specific, controlled flatness that held something underneath it, not pity, something closer to accounting. William looked at the street for a long time before he spoke. Smoky had moved and was now pressed against his right side, The 30-kilo weight had him warm and constant, and William's large hand was resting on the dog's shoulder without apparent thought. The way you rest your hand on something that has kept you anchored through 7 years of difficult weather. Shearwater was a 3-day operation. William said finally, extraction and route security for a diplomatic asset in a location I cannot name. He paused. The intelligence about the route was wrong. We walked the primary team into a compromise on day 2. I made a call. He stopped. You got them out, Carter said. 3 of them. 2 I didn't. You got the asset out. Yes. The after-action I read says you operated alone for 11 hours on day 3. Your team was pulled back to the secondary extraction point after the compromise. You stayed to maintain the route for the asset's transport. Yes. 11 hours. Yes. With a dog. William looked at Smoky. The big shepherd looked back at him with those amber eyes, quiet, steady. The black and tan coat was very still in the morning light. He was younger then, William said. We both were. Carter nodded. He seemed to be composing himself around something. The commendation that should have been filed for that operation was, it was categorized differently for operational security reasons. It affected your separation classification, which affected your benefit eligibility. William breathed evenly. I know. Do you know someone's been sitting on a correction request for 4 years? Elena had come to her front door. She was holding her coffee mug and standing in the frame and not pretending she wasn't listening, which William appreciated for its honesty. Across the street, Margaret Chun was still holding her newspaper, which she had retrieved 11 minutes ago. She had not gone back inside. Derek Osmond's wife had found a reason to water her front garden, which she was doing slowly. The hose pointed at a bush she had already watered. The street was listening, not obviously, not rudely, but with that particular quality of sideways attention that neighborhoods deploy when something real is happening in public in a way that resists being ignored. Smoky seemed aware of the audience, or perhaps simply aware that the human emotional tenor of the immediate area had shifted, which was something his training and his nature had made him exquisitely sensitive to. He stood up and took a slow, calm circuit of the front step area, the powerful athletic body moving with deliberate visibility, and then came back and sat down in plain sight. He was not performing. He was simply present. Carter watched the dog for a moment. He's remarkable, he said quietly. Yes, William said. He was in the op reports too. By call sign. Carter paused. I didn't realize it was the same dog until just now. William looked at Smoky. The dog's ears shifted forward. It's the same dog, William confirmed. Across the street, Margaretchen had taken 2 steps toward the curb. She crossed with the careful deliberateness of someone who has decided to do something and has not allowed herself time to reconsider. Margaret Chun was 61, small, with reading glasses she'd forgotten to take off pushed up in her hair. She stopped at the foot of Elena's front path and looked at William with the specific expression of someone whose internal map of situation has just been substantially revised. I owe you an apology, she said. William looked at her. I told people you'd screamed at someone. She held his gaze. You'd been startled awake. I saw it from my window. I knew that, and I said it differently. William was quiet for a moment. The moss-green eyes were steady, neither forgiving nor condemning, simply attentive. I appreciate that, he said. That's more grace than I gave you. You were doing what neighbors do, he said, trying to keep your street safe. I was doing it with bad information that I helped make worse. She glanced at Smoky, who was regarding her with the alert neutrality of a dog recalibrating an assessment. I heard some of what... She stopped. I heard enough. She looked at Carter, then back at William. Is there something that can actually be done? She asked. Not soft, not bleeding. The practical question. Carter reached into his jacket and produced a business card and a folded paper. There's a correction filing that's been installed at a specific desk for 4 years. I know which desk. I know the person sitting at it. He set the papers on the step beside William's coffee mug. And I have friends. It was Smoky who broke the static quality of the moment. He stood up, walked to the edge of the step, and looked directly at Derek Osmond's wife across the street. She had stopped pretending to water the bush. She was just standing there, holding the hose, looking at the small gathering on Elena's front step. Smoky looked at her for a long moment. Then he sat down. A deliberate, calm sit, the kind of sit that said, "I see you and I am not what you decided I was." The woman put down her hose. She crossed the street. Her name was Frances Osmond, and she was 47, and she came to the foot of the path and said, "My husband told you to leave before he called someone." She paused. "He's at the hardware store. He doesn't know he'll be apologizing to you later, but he will be." Smoky's ears shifted toward her. "He was wrong," she said. We were working off a story we'd already decided." William nodded once. Simple acknowledgement. "Is there something we can do?" she asked. The same practical question as Margaret. The street's language. Elena had come down from the doorway and was now standing at the bottom of her front steps. She looked at the small gathering and then at William with the particular expression of a woman who has watched emergency situations stabilize around a single still point. "There's housing paperwork," Carter said, "a correction to file, and some calls to make to people who owe me." He looked at William. "If you're willing to let me make them." William looked at the street. The salt and pepper hair, the green eyes, the weathered face holding its lines in the morning light. "I'm willing," he said. Carter explained it carefully, because William asked him to, and because carefully was the only way it made sense. The separation classification from William's final tour had been filed under a code that, due to what Carter described as a processing decision motivated by operational security, and what Carter's expression made clear he considered something considerably less neutral than that, had categorized his discharge in a way that made him ineligible for the higher tier of VA benefits. The housing voucher program, the priority case worker assignment, the transitional support structures that were specifically designed for veterans with complex service histories. The classification should have been different. The mission documentation supported a different classification. For years ago, a correction request had been filed by someone in William's former unit. William had not known this, and it had been received by a desk at a regional VA administrative office, and it had not moved. "Why not?" Elena asked. Carter looked at his business card, which was still sitting on the step. Bureaucratic inertia, underfunding, a specific person at a specific desk who processes 50 cases. A weak and doesn't have the bandwidth to push back on classifications that require additional security coordination. He paused. And possibly some institutional reluctance around drawing attention to operations that were never officially acknowledged. William was quiet. His large hands were on his knees, and he was looking at the middle distance. And Elena recognized the expression from her years of emergency medicine, the expression of someone processing a very large fact in real time. "For years," he said. "Yes. I've been 14 months fully homeless. For years of unstable housing before that." "Yes." Smoky put his head on William's knee. The big shepherd's amber eyes were upward, fixed on the square-jawed face above him. William's hand moved the dog's head automatically. "All right," he said. "Tell me what you need from me." Carter made 4 phone calls from Elena's kitchen table. William sat on the other side of the table and listened to calls with the attentiveness of a man who has learned that the details of bureaucratic processes are as operationally significant as any field intelligence. And Elena stood near the stove and did not pretend to be doing anything else. The first call was brief. Carter identified himself to someone by name, speaking quickly, referencing a case number William had never heard. The second call was longer, And at one point, Carter's voice changed register in a way that suggested he was applying leverage he had been conserving for something he considered worth it. The third call, Carter handed the phone to William. A woman's voice, carefully official. Mr. Wynne, I'm the district supervisor for transitional housing case assignment. I've been provided your case number, and I've been briefed on the classification review. I want to begin the correction process today, if you're available. William looked at his own hands on the table, the rugged, sun-kissed skin, the slight steadiness issue that had begun on day 2 of the fast and had not fully resolved even after Elena's chicken. He pressed them flat. I'm available, he said. The fourth call was Carter again. Short, a single address read out, and a name and the words. He needs the dog accommodation clause applied. Non-negotiable. The dog stays with him. A pause on the other end. Carter said nothing more. The pause ended. Confirmed, the voice said. Carter set the phone down on the table and looked at William. Smoky, who had been lying under the table, stood up. While Carter was working the phones and paperwork, Elena did what Elena did. She solved immediate problems with immediate resources. She called her nephew Marcus, who was 28 and owned a van and owed her a favor of genuinely significant proportions, and asked him to bring 3 bags of high-quality dog food from the pet supply store on Hendricks Avenue. She texted Frances Osmond, who had gone home and apparently had a conversation with her husband that resulted in Derek Osmond appearing on Elena's front step at noon, looking like a man who had recently been educated about himself, holding a grocery bag. I'm not good at speeches, Derek said to William, who was sitting on the front step with Smoky, going through the paperwork Carter had printed at the pharmacy on the corner. But I'm good at groceries. He set the bag down. And I'm sorry for what I said, for the way I said it. William looked at him, the green eyes level, the square jaw, the weathered face, the silver in the beard catching the midday light. Appreciated, he said. His voice was not warm exactly, but it was not cold. It was a voice of a man who accepted things at face value, without requiring them to be performed. Derek nodded once and left. Margaret came by an hour later with her husband, who was quieter than she was, and a casserole dish that she said could go in the fridge and heat at 350. By 4 o'clock, Elm Cross Avenue had quietly, without announcement or declaration, reversed its position on William Wynne. Smoky lay on the front step in the afternoon sun, his black and tan coat warm, his amber eyes half closed, appearing for all the world like a dog who had simply been waiting for the street to catch up. Carter stayed until 5. He had a folder of documents by then, printed forms, confirmation numbers written in his precise handwriting, a timeline of next steps. He gave the folder to William at Elena's kitchen table and went through each page. William listened without interrupting. He asked 2 specific questions at specific points in the briefing. Precise questions about documentation requirements and appeal windows that Carter answered with equal precision, and that made Elena, watching from the kitchen counter, understand something more clearly about who this man had been before the street. Before Carter left, he stood at the front door for a moment. The people who should have fixed this 4 years ago, he said, didn't fix it. I'm not going to tell you. There's a good reason for that. There isn't. There's an insufficient reason, which is different. William looked at him. I'm not asking for a reason. I know. Carter put his jacket on. He looked at Smoky, who was sitting at William's left side in that precise, devoted position that had not changed in 7 years. The after-action report on Shearwater is one of 12 I've read in 20 years that made me feel. He stopped. That made me understand why the work matters. Not abstractly, concretely. He held out his hand. William shook it. The grip was firm on both sides. I'll follow up on the correction confirmation on Monday, Carter said. You have my number. He walked to the gray sedan, got in, and drove away. William stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he looked down at Smoky. You started this, he said quietly. Smoky looked up at him, those amber eyes completely steady, not taking credit, not deflecting it. That night, William slept on a fold-out cot in Elena's back room for the second night in a row, with the confirmed knowledge that on Monday morning a correction process would begin, that a case worker had been assigned, and that the housing voucher application had been flagged for expedited review with the dog accommodation clause applied. He lay on the cot with Smoky a warm weight at his feet, the shepherd's preferred sleeping position when indoors, occupying the foot of any available surface with the calm authority of a dog who had earned the right to comfort and knew it. The deep forehead lines were relaxed in sleep in a way they hadn't been in some time. The salt and pepper buzz cut was crushed slightly against the pillow. The broad shoulders, the square jaw, the rugged 50-year-old face, all of it stilled, finally, in actual rest. Elena had left a lamp on in the hall, not because he'd asked, because she was a woman who understood, after 26 years of emergency medicine, that the transition from crisis to safety was not instantaneous, and that small continuities of light helped the nervous system believe it. Outside, Elm Cross Avenue was quiet. The yellow house with the cracked gutter was dark. The flower boxes in the bakery window caught moonlight. Mrs. Holt's stoop, 3 blocks over, was empty in the October night. A street that had turned its back had turned around. Not with a speech, not with a resolution or a declaration, with a plate of food on a back step, and a German shepherd who understood something about loyalty that no training had given him and no training could take away. William slept. Smoky watched the door for a while. Then, satisfied, the big shepherd put his chin on his paws and closed his eyes. The correction was confirmed on Wednesday. The case worker, a woman named Diane, who had a photograph of a Labrador on her desk and spoke to William with a brisk, compassionate directness of someone who had decided, somewhere along the way, that her job was to solve problems rather than process them, told him the expedited review had been approved and that a transitional housing placement with dog accommodation was available within the district. William moved in on a Friday, 14 months after he'd first sat down on a park bench with Smoky and understood that the city he'd returned to was not going to easily make space for him. The apartment was small, a studio with a window that looked at a fire escape. The walls were a particular shade of off-white that transitional housing walls always were. There was a radiator that knocked. William stood in the middle of the room for a moment, tall, broad-shouldered, salt and pepper, and silver-streaked, the green eyes taking the 4 walls and window and the knocked radiator and the small patch of floor near the door where Smoky had already chosen a spot and was lying down with that air of settled finality that meant, "This will do. This is ours." Elena had given him the casserole dish. Margaret had given him a set of towels. Francis Osmond had left a bag at Elena's door with coffee and dish soap and a handwritten note that said, simply, "Welcome to staying." Carter had texted, "Correction officially logged. Retroactive benefit adjustment being calculated. More to come." William read the text and put the phone in his pocket and looked at Smoky. The dog looked back at him. 30 kilograms of black and tan German shepherd, amber eyes calm, chin on his paws, occupying his corner like he'd always been there. "We made it," William said. Smoky thumped his tail once. It was enough.